How is everybody doing? All right. Okay, so for this breakout, we have Tanea Kuntz, who's in here. She's the Delegate Council Steering Committee lead. We've got Ari Wilkins, who is our scribe and will also report out when we reconvene. And then we have Elisa Powell monitoring the chat. Okay, so nearing the end of the day, appreciate everybody's attention. During this breakout session, I'm going to be diving further into the advisory function of how the Delegate Council works. So we're going to come out of this session with a clear understanding, I hope, of how the delegates will provide advice and guidance in GS and at what level the organizational issues will be handled. So again, we're going to head right into some initial polling questions. So if we can have the first one up, that would be fantastic. So the ice cream, yeah, of course you can. You should eat ice cream. Ice cream is a food group. Other than that one, I do think an outcome of all of our interactions could be new content for the website. Will be new programs and services for members and organization. The answer we was looking for is C, to provide a voice NGS reflective of the needs of genealogy member organizations. And this, I think, in a nutshell, is kind of restated as help set the course, help NGS set the course, and help identify the need for course correction if we encounter that need. All right, next poll question, please. Okay. And we're headed in the right direction. D is the answer that we were looking for, on the ground knowledge about what societies and organizations need. This is almost, my interpretation is this is kind of the democratic approach to defining need. NGS can't possibly have all of the knowledge as it relates to every aspect of what your organizations are doing, what they need, what challenges they are needing to navigate around. So this is where we need the input, we need the influence from all of the representative organizations that the council is comprised of. And the last poll question, please. Matt sometimes does need help knowing what to do. Don't
I
we
came
all?
close. I came close to marking that for you, Matt, just because.
Yeah, very much in the spirit of communication and collaboration and partnership. It's about playing an advisory role to the direction of NGS. So very good. All very interrelated questions. Glad we're all on the same page. Before we go into the council activity, any kind of reflections on any of the stuff that we've discussed in the first two sessions, as it relates to the final kind of, more governance role, where kind of the council sits in the whole NGS governance model in council? Any questions or comments?
Very unusual to me to work with an organization that is willing to listen to the lessers.
Interesting way to put it.
Usually it's the other way around where I've been.
Well, I think it's part of that is admitting we can't have all knowledge of all things at all times. And we are very much in the service of a larger community, and we need to be influenced by that community, and we need to create meaningful ways to do that, and also at the same time be efficient. Think about how we can be most efficient to facilitate communications, and that's part of what this whole workshop is about. And it'll certainly be, this is one step in an evolutionary process. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay. All right. Well, the next series of kind of poll questions or activities is to walk through some kind of hypothetical issues or topics that might come up, and what the best way of resolving or communicating, collaborating about those issues would be. So if we can put up the first hypothetical. Okay, so looks like we had a couple people change their answers, which is fine. I'm interested to drill into some of the responses, though. I think, as we go through some of these hypotheticals, things might rise to a different level depending on how the conversation develops. This question, the answer we were looking for is A, post a question in the member community for collaborative help, advice, and assistance. And I think this is an example of that's where the best starting point is socialize this question with your peers, and determine what others are doing. Have others solved this issue? Can you solve the issue based on some quick communication? And then that gives us an idea, or gives the community at large an idea of how large the issue is. How applicable is this to the full group of delegates, or the full group of organizations? Is anybody brave enough to let us know why they selected either B or C initially?
I raised I selected B initially because I was just concentrating on the delegate council, since that's what we're discussing today. And then after I saw that everybody else selected A, and it dawned on me that that would be the more appropriate way to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the first stop for a lot of things. And going there first is kind of, it's going to take some acclimation. You're going to have to get familiar with the community itself, how the platform works. It will be a behavioral shift because it will be a new way of communicating, and that'll take some time. But hopefully, as we roll it out over the summer, we'll have some training involved. You'll have an opportunity certainly to ask questions about how the thing works, and you'll be able to set your own preferences. But it is a unique communication vehicle, and ideally it is something that we all embrace, because the more people that are in there, the more people that are accessible, the quicker we will solve each other's issues and socialize, and be able to facilitate networking. So adoption is key.
I actually checked off A immediately, but after I was looking at this, B, submit an agenda for the next delegate council meeting. Obviously, we wouldn't do that, but I don't think it would be a bad idea to be able to submit suggestions of for things for the agenda.
Absolutely, yeah, and there will be. I think we've got to spend a little bit more time thinking about how we create the process for that, as we think about how large the delegate council community will be when it's kind of fully seated. 400 plus individuals representing 400 plus organizations. So again, we've got to try and figure out how to be efficient. But you're right, there does have to be a process for determining what is relevant to get on that agenda.
And Ethan, if I may, we did play a little trick on you all with this question. So the word initially is in the question itself. So pay attention to that word, because you might see it again.
If I may ask, what type of differences do you all envision between if we had this question about a small genealogy library, what would make it go up to the delegate council? What about this would be something that could go up to the council?
If I could, I'll give an example.
Okay.
So this is, from my perspective as an executive director, I would anticipate on an issue like this that we're going to hear it more than once, right? We may hear it 5 times or 10 times. That means there is clearly something going on in the context of our genealogy organizations and their ability to manage these records. How do we provide access to these records, and how do we maintain them? What does that look like if we scale it up? So when this goes to the board is when there is a common concern that shows that there is a scalable issue. I hate to use business language in this case, but that's the reality of what's going to happen. And you can imagine that the delegate council, as they're debating and discussing this issue, might come up with some suggestions or ideas. Hey, what if we had a small grant program for genealogy organizations to maintain their libraries? Now we're talking about allocating resources. That's clearly where something moves to the board, right? So over time, we're going to learn about things like this. And earlier on in today's workshop, you heard the term the NGS planning cycle. You don't need to worry about that right now, but clearly, as an organization with a nearly $2 million budget, we plan out a year in advance, and beginning these discussions, finding the ideas, looking at potential solutions, and bringing those forward to the board gives us the time to plan and to be able to respond and do things in this case. So that's just a simple example of how something might raise from the member community onto the delegate council's agenda and ultimately to the board.
Okay. Let's move on to the second hypothetical. So this is another one that was intentionally tricky. now that I'm reading it, there's actually several answers that could be correct. I'm glad that nobody has selected A, which is good. B, C, and D is what we were looking for. C and D are very similar. Obviously, D is one way you accomplish C. The other ways would be the member community that we have. We'll have up and running over the summer, depending on the timing of the issue. Could have been during a networking event, during one of the virtual meetings or the in-person meeting next May. And then again, if it, as Matt was kind of alluding to, if issues reach kind of this critical mass where it is applicable or affecting a large portion of the population, then that's when it needs to be discussed, at a delegate council meeting or convening, larger convening of the group. Any questions or comments about this?
Let's see what the correct answers were.
I had a question about submitting to the agenda. If we're in these smaller forums, all experiencing the same issue, do you want each society to submit to the agenda, or is there going to be somebody that we contact with our idea so that there's one submission? How is that going to work?
So that's a good question. I think, and Matt, please interrupt me, but I think some of this stuff we still need to document how that sequence is going to happen and how it's going to get funneled to, in this case, either the delegate council chair when that person is constructing agendas for a council meeting, or then the board itself. So there's going to have to be a process with timelines established for both in order to make sure that everybody is aware of how it happens, and so we can coordinate at the particular level.
Yeah, I think, Ethan, that's a good answer. Is there's clearly going to be a process. Tiffany, in terms of the specifics and how do we manage efficiencies of not having the same thing submitted, you can almost imagine that we'll have some kind of document available in the cloud where everyone can see what's been submitted so that there is no repeating, or some kind of Excel form of some kind. But we don't know exactly yet. But the more important piece is there will be some rationale, some process put in place so that there, as Ethan indicated, that there is a call for agenda items at a specific time. So the time to build an agenda, provide background materials to the delegates ahead of the meeting, all of that stuff so that you know what's coming and can prepare for it.
Ken, go ahead.
I know that among some people, there's a resistance to Facebook. Sometimes it's based upon seniority. I don't know. Have you noticed any reluctance to use your forum on Facebook? Because that's the reason I checked C.
We haven't seen any reluctance expressed yet, but clearly, not everybody is participating in the Facebook Society and Organization Leaders Forum yet. That's one of the reasons why we're bringing the Higher Logic communities on board, because that's our community. It's controlled by NGS, not by any of the large social media companies. In either case, some people are going to want to join and some people are not going to want to join. And so we have multiple communication channels that will be obviously being able to review and look at for information for issues that are rising to the surface, so to speak. And Ken, on a more specific point, we actually see more people resistant to doing events on Zoom than we do so far to joining the Facebook group. I think the Facebook group may be an awareness issue.
Well, you are testing my patience on Zoom. This is the longest Zoom meeting I've ever been on. So you're going to keep Facebook when you get the
most likely, because that community has over 400 members on it. Most likely we keep that one for the time being.
Is the Facebook page public or private?
I'll send you the link to it, Susie, and you can request to join and we'll approve it.
Okay, great.
Yep. I'll post it in the chat for everyone.
Okay. And also, I wanted to say, I have found with some of my other organizations that a national a Facebook page for the societies works well for discussing issues that we are all having, like, does anybody have any thoughts about how to publicize your events and, things like that. And you get lots of responses, and I'd like to see that happen with this group.
It's in the chat. There you go, Susie.
I think there's been a lot of negativity probably at Facebook over the last 6 months that may keep a lot of people from even wanting to join Facebook at all, let alone our group. That's something that each person has to overcome on their own, I think, because it's always going to be there. The negative is always going to be there somewhere. And if you search it out, you're going to find it. So you just have to be positive, and hopefully NGS is the positive aspect in all this.
Any other comments before we move on to the next question? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move on to question 3. All right, I think we're ready to see the right answer. Excellent. And this question kind of implies that we are reaching critical mass. Other organizations are having the same issue. So C, obviously, opportunity to just kind of further legitimize that. And then B is submit an agenda item for the council to discuss ways that we might facilitate a training program to recruit volunteers. So that's the way. If we can't figure out, we understand that there's this critical mass, this systemic issue that organizations are dealing with, can't be solved in the community itself. We need kind of a larger conversation about addressing that particular systemic issue. That's when it rises to the need to put it on an agenda item, or put it on an agenda. So all very related questions. Any kind of specific commentary about this question?
I guess the only question I would have is where do you all get your knowledge and expertise in answering a question like this?
Well, I think you can do this a couple of ways. I mean, from the staff perspective, there are kind of general organizational or association approaches to recruiting volunteers, maintaining volunteers. We talked a little bit about this in one of the first breakout sessions. Creating that pipeline of engagement, integrating kind of succession planning in the existing volunteer charges. So there are kind of general approaches, and then you gotta tweak those general approaches to fit your audience. So these are the kinds of conversations that you have at the volunteer level. This is probably one where some specific resources might be generated between existing organizational volunteers and GS staff, and then that gets kind of proliferated out to the community at large. And there is going to be a staff, I will say, there is going to be a staff presence within Higher Logic. So helping to facilitate the conversations that are occurring there, helping organizational leaders understand how to best leverage the tool. And then there's going to be interactivity, to a certain degree within the community itself and within the discussion threads themselves. Any other questions before we move on to the final poll? Okay, let's head to the last question then. Okay, and the correct answer is use the contact us page on the website. So this is a good example of where reach out directly to staff, fix that's going to be the most direct way to resolve the issue. I did notice somebody initially responded E. I wasn't sure if that was just apathy at the end of the day, but then somebody changed their response. But yeah, very good. In all of this, again, there is always staff support available. There is always going to be a safety net, if you will, a staff safety net, if you will. Now, it often might not be the most efficient way to get where you need to go as we learn how to interact in these communities and access these self-service resources. That's ideal, but in this situation, fixing the website, take it right to staff. Any kind of comments or questions about this particular question, or really anything else council related as we move past the polls?
Question about the Higher Logic. That's going to be an active area for collaboration. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, so it functions very similar to a social media group or a social media platform like Facebook. It is a controlled environment, if you will. So NGS staff is the one, or the people that are operating it, and will help configure the community. But once you're in there and once you're familiar with navigating it, your interactivity will largely be based on your own personal preferences and how often you visit. So again, we're gonna continue, I think, to ask some more questions about how the communities themselves get configured and how people get subscribed to individual either kind of special interest areas or other communities, but then it'll be very self-service.
So is NGS essentially rebranding the Higher Logic company's platform?
That's a really good question, Dean, and kind of spot on. So Higher Logic is the company. The platform itself, when we put it in place for NGS, will have a name. There are two leading candidates for that name. We have not yet made that decision, but when we are ready to launch, you will get the information about what the platform will be called in the NGS environment. Yes.
Because I was just looking when you said Higher Logic, I just kind of Googled that and come up with,
Yep.
hey, there's a company there that does this for a business, which I'm presuming you're using then.
That's correct. And Ethan and I are both longtime members of the American Society of Association Executives, and we're very familiar with the platform because, in my case, I've been using it for almost 20 years. And in the American Society of Association Executives, it's called Collaborate. 1/3 of what we've all been talking about today, right? So
Good.
We probably won't use that name, but
Do we get to vote on the name?
well, I'll tell you, the leading candidate is the Forum, which is the former name of the FGS magazine.
I have a question. At the beginning of today, there was a presentation about FGS and what its accomplishments were. I was not really aware that they had compiled the Civil War and the Mexican War databases. I was aware of the War of 1812 pensions. So where will the big ideas come from? Should they come through this council part of the delegates, and what are there big ideas on the horizon? And one big idea that I have, and this may not be the place to share it, but we have had and continue to have people that have collected genealogical materials for years and decades, and their children aren't interested in it. And I think it's a real problem. I know when I started, I'm one of those that have been doing this since I was a child, so over 50 years. And I know that there were compiled collections that I used that were very valuable and still are valuable, even though they may not have well-documented information, but it's helpful. Is there a way that NGS can guide us through advising people and figuring out how to do that, or maybe even providing a resource? And I'm sure there are other big ideas that I'm not thinking about, but tell me what y'all are thinking along those lines.
Eric, that's an exceptional question, right? The when we were talking in the prior breakout about collaboration, we talked a little bit, we talked almost exclusively about how we're going to collaborate together to support each other as organizations. How do we help make societies, libraries, archives, and museums operate better? But there's another level of collaboration, right? The kind of work that FGS did on the Preserve the Pensions project, or what you're describing in terms of building a program to manage family records on behalf of families that cannot manage those records. That's really at another level of collaboration. But that's also part of the Delegate Council's mission, right? Part of your mission is to advise NGS on the needs of your organizations. But there's another piece, which perhaps we haven't underscored as much, which is to provide advice to the NGS board on big picture genealogy issues as well. And I think there, over time, we'll see some of that move into its proper place, where those big issues are discussed and debated and big programs are lifted up. I don't imagine that's going to happen right away. I think there's going to be some practical stuff that we'll focus on to deliver on behalf of the organizational member needs. But absolutely, this is a place for bringing those issues up. Good question.
Okay, so that, I mean, I think that was a great example of going beyond kind of the mechanics. We're still trying to work out a lot of the mechanics for how we're going to interact and how the communication and collaboration happens. But then once those mechanics are well in place, and the full community, the delegates at large, are understanding and operating in that environment, then that's exactly, as Matt said, that's the purpose. That's the purpose of the council. So again, taking it back to the learning outcomes, understanding what the Delegate Council's place is to discuss, debate, and advise. Delegates, again, being the voice of their organization and the voice of the larger community that NGS serves. And then understanding the existing resources. So what is currently out there on the NGS website that is self-service available, the Facebook group, and then the emerging online community that will roll out over the summer. And again, I think a lot will develop out of that community, not just discussion threads, but resources that either get shared from organization to organization, and that place becomes another library for the sharing and the access of resources. But then it will likely trigger the development of additional resources, either from the bottom up or the top down. So we've got another couple of minutes before we're going to get pulled back into the full group session. Any other questions or comments? Elisa, as scribe, anything you want to clarify before you report back to the full group?
I'm not the scribe on this.
You're
one.
not the scribe. I
Okay.
apologize.
Harry.
You are the chat. You are the chat.
It's me.
Very.
I think I'm good. I don't have any questions.
I do think that, collaboration is wonderful, and giving counsel to each other as well as giving and receiving to NGS. So I hope you all stick with us. We got more to go here, a little bit more. We're going to break out again, and we're going to talk about more specifics. So stay with us today. We've enjoyed your company.
I think that's important point, Elisa. The next set of breakout groups will not be with our facilitators from the day, but will be managed by our Delegate Council Steering Committee members. Those will be topical breakouts, and those will begin right around 4:40 this afternoon. And you'll be able to choose which breakout room you want to go into. So in our last minute here, I'll just mention those. Recruiting and managing volunteers with Tania Kuntz, who's on the screen with you now. Growing and expanding membership with Elisa Powell, who's on the screen with you now. Managing virtual events with Lois Mackin. Planning exceptional programs with Sherry Passy and Ari Wilkins, who's on the screen with you. Preserving and accessing records with Susan Howard, and fundraising with Lori Hermance Moore. So those are the 6 breakouts that will be coming up in about half an hour. And I hope all, go ahead.
Can we switch between, or do we stuck with one when we join it?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question, Dean, but I will get it for you and put it in the chat in the all group.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.